Marc Garneau, you were the first Canadian astronaut in space, and you were also the first astronaut to serve as a federal cabinet minister. And many of us here in this room, and on Zoom I'm sure too, remember you as our local MP. You retired from politics last year, and now you've written a book recounting your extraordinary life. Thanks so much for coming here to share your story with us. Marc, you were born in 1949 into a military family in Quebec City, and you write in the book that by the age of 12, you'd already lived in 7 different places. If you talk to a lot of military brats, they say their lives were very difficult from moving so often. How did you turn it into a positive experience?
Well, thank you very much, Marian, and thank you, Lynn, and thank you to the audience that's here with us and to the Zoom audience as well. I was very lucky. You're right. I had moved already 7 times by the age of 12. My father was in the Royal 22nd Regiment, the infantry, and he got moved around a lot. But for me, every move was an exciting opportunity, which is quite different from my older brother, who's a year older than me. He didn't actually like to move, and it was very stressful for him every time because it meant losing his friends. Not that I didn't have any friends, but I felt very comfortable. To me, every new place was a new adventure. And so I think that sort of says something about the kind of person I am. I like to do new things, and I'm always looking forward to the next thing.
Now, people think of astronauts as being these very upstanding people who do the right thing all the time, have the right stuff, but you were occasionally quite mischievous. You write about one incident in Quebec City when you were actually arrested by the police, and you say that really changed your outlook on life. Can you tell me about that?
Thank you for asking that question. I think, yes, I was a little bit of a rebel when I was young, and I pushed back a little bit at authority and thought that I always had the right answer for everything. And when I had just turned 16, I'll be very candid, it's in the book anyway, I was with a friend, and we had gone to, in the old days, what they called a tavern, and drank too much beer. And to put it politely, I was severely intoxicated when I came out of there, and we were walking down the street, this is in Quebec City, in the old Quebec, and he spotted a car with an open trunk, and there were things in the trunk, and he looked at me and he said, "Watch this." And he reached in and took something out of the trunk, which was parked in front of a radio station. The owner had just gone in temporarily. And at that moment, the owner came back out of the radio station, spotted us, started to yell. We both scattered in a panic in different directions. And I hid for about 10 minutes. I was drunk. And then came out, and the police spotted me, and I was arrested and spent until 3 o'clock in the morning in a jail cell in old Quebec City. And it was a very sobering, to put it mildly, experience. And I felt a great deal of shame because I knew that my father would have to come and pick me up at 3 in the morning. And my father was, at that time, commander of the 3rd Battalion of the Royal 22nd Regiment, which was a position of prestige in Quebec City, particularly, where the Vandus comes from. And I felt that deep shame. And anyway, he came and picked me up and took me home. And my parents were incredibly reasonable about what I had done. There wasn't a lot of shouting. Anyway, I appeared in front of a judge 2 months later, and he scared the pants off me and told me if I ever appeared in front of him again, it would be very severe. And that changed my way of thinking about things. I realized that yes, I had a spirit of adventure and wanting to go out and do things, but I didn't have the good judgment to go with it at that age. I told myself that I needed to straighten out and to get my act together. And for a bunch of reasons that are explained in the book, I had always been drawn towards the Navy. So I went down to the recruiting center. I was 16. And asked to join the armed forces in the Navy, allowing me to go to military college, the one in Saint-Jean, just 30 miles from here. And it was, for me, an attempt to straighten my life out. And not that my parents hadn't done a good job, they had. It's just that I lacked a certain amount of inner discipline, if I can put it that way.
Well, as you say, you went on to Saint Jean, you did your bachelor's in engineering, and then you won a graduate scholarship to go to London, England. Now, during that process, you met James Cross, who was the British Trade Commissioner, and this was shortly before he was kidnapped. And then later, when you were in London, you met Mr. Cross again. What impression did this make on you?
A very big impression. Some of you may remember James Cross. And so in 1970, he was the British Trade Commissioner here in Canada. And I was one of 40 young Canadians who had won what's called an Athlone Scholarship, which is a British Board of Trade scholarship, allowing us to go over to England to study for 2 years, which I did. But he gathered us all at Dorval Airport, as it was called in those days, to wish us all a good trip and a good time in England. And this is obviously before he was kidnapped, and he looked fine and thriving. And then shortly after I arrived in England and started to settle in, I heard that he had been kidnapped. I also heard about Pierre Laporte being killed and his body being found in the trunk of a car. And in the end, of course, James Cross spent about 2 months in captivity, often being threatened with his life, his family going through agony, not knowing whether or not they would ever see James Cross again. And a year after I had arrived in England, the 1-year anniversary of the Athlone class of 70, we were invited to a luncheon, and the guest of honor was James Cross. And I sat right beside him at the table and had obviously a duty to be a host as well to him. And he looked about 20 years older, and the life had been sucked out of him. And it made me, I have to say, deeply embarrassed that this had happened to him in his life in Canada. And it was an uneasy conversation. I was, of course, saying how much I was enjoying being at Imperial College and how much I enjoyed being in England. And we were both, of course, avoiding the big elephant in the room and not talking about the ordeal he had gone through. But it was very obvious, just from looking at him, that he had gone through a terrible, terrible period in his life. So that's what I remember from that, bit of a witness to an unfortunate episode in Canada's history.
As a naval officer, you were a combat systems engineer on a warship where you were involved in surface-to-air missile trials, and you also became a ship's diver, and you worked your way up through the ranks and became a commander. But then, in 1983, you spotted a newspaper ad that would change your life. Can you tell me about that?
Yes, absolutely. My first love in life was to be in the Navy. People have asked me in the past 40 years if I dreamt of becoming an astronaut when I was a little boy. Frankly, I didn't. I wanted to join the Navy. I had crossed the ocean with my parents twice in a passenger liner, once from Montreal here on the Empress of Britain when I was 12. And I just fell in love with the ocean. So that's what I wanted to do. And I joined the Navy, and I was gone to military college. I was doing a naval career, very happy with it. And I was sitting in my backyard in Ottawa. I had been posted to National Defense Headquarters in Ottawa. And I was just skimming through the Ottawa Citizen, which was this new newspaper that I wasn't familiar with. And I came across this ad. And it was a very innocuous ad that said Canadian Astronaut Program. Now, cast your mind back to 1983. We didn't have an astronaut program here in Canada. And my first thought was, why are they talking about a Canadian astronaut program? We don't even have a rocket to send our Canadians up into space. And of course, reading through it and learning about it, I discovered that NASA was inviting Canada to provide 2 Canadians to fly in space. And the reason for this is because a Canadian company called Spar Aerospace, and its successor is MDA, living out in Saint-Anne-de-Bellevue today, had approached NASA and said, we'd like to design and build that robotic arm that you need on the space shuttle. And there's a complicated story there. At first, NASA was not too enthusiastic about getting a foreign country to do their robotic arm, but we were persuasive, or Spar was persuasive. And finally, they said, okay, you can do it. It worked so well, in fact, it worked perfectly every time it flew on 90 missions, that NASA said, we'd like to thank Canada. And that gave rise to the creation of the Canadian astronaut program, because we had to run a competition to find some Canadians to do it. And that's the ad that I spotted in the paper. And I almost fell out of my chair when I saw it, and then said to myself, this would be an exciting adventure on the frontier of space. And it was still, you know, fairly early in the space program. And I couldn't resist it. And I spoke to my wife, who said, yeah, go ahead, go ahead. I don't know if she thought I wouldn't make it or what, but I was pretty sure I wasn't going to make it, because I was sure I just read The Right Stuff. It came out that year or the year before, and I didn't think I had the right stuff. But I said, I'll kick myself if I don't apply. So I applied, and make a long story short, 6 months later, after a number of phases, I made it to become one of the first 6 Canadians.
Well, you definitely had the right stuff, because not only were you chosen from more than 4,300 applicants, but when the 6 Canadians were chosen, you were again chosen to be the first Canadian to go up in space. So it's an absolutely amazing story. And what set you apart from the others?
It's a question I've been asked many, many times. And to be honest with you, I thought my 5 colleagues were equally qualified to go up there. If I had to venture a guess, I would say a couple of things. One is I was fully bilingual, and I think they probably wanted the first Canadian, if possible, all other things being equal, to be able to come back and tell the story in both languages. Secondly, I had crossed the ocean in a sailboat with a crew of 13, and in a race in 1969, a 57-foot sailboat called a yawl, for those who know sailing, 2-masted sailboat, and we had to race from Newport in Rhode Island to Cork in Ireland. It was a 20-day sail crossing, and we encountered good weather, but we also encountered bad weather. And you have to work as a team if you're part of a crew. The biggest job is changing sails, because the different wind conditions and sea conditions, you need to change your sails, and you have to do it quickly, because when a sail gets pulled down, you lose speed, obviously, and it's a race. And so I think I had proven as an example that I could work with a team of people in sometimes uncomfortable conditions, and I think that helped me a little bit in my selection. So, but either way, the day I was chosen to be the first to fly, I have to say that I felt the weight of the country on my shoulders, and I hadn't realized that up until that point. I was so eager to hopefully fly one day, I didn't realize that, everybody's going to be looking, and I better do a good job.
Well, the big day came in October 1984 when you went up in the Challenger. What are your most vivid memories of looking out of the window of the Challenger at planet Earth?
First, disbelief that I was actually looking out a window and looking down at my planet. Now, when you're in the space shuttle, you're about, in my case, it was about 400 kilometers above the Earth. You're not far enough away to see the whole of Earth. Those famous pictures are taken by missions, the Apollo missions that went to the moon. So they were far enough away to get the whole blue marble, the planet. But you're still very high, and you see a significant amount of curvature. You can see about 1,500 kilometers in front of you, and you are going very fast. It only takes 90 minutes to orbit the Earth. So you are going to go over many, many countries during that time that you're up there. On my first mission, we did 133 orbits. And looking down, and when you see Earth silhouetted against the blackness of surrounding space, you begin to realize that this planet, which is ours and is the cradle of humanity, where 8 billion of us currently share this planet, its oceans, its atmosphere, and there is no option B. There is nowhere else for us to go. You begin to sense that we need to take care of this planet in perhaps a way that you don't when you're on the ground, because it all seems so immense. Your horizon on the ground is maybe 7 kilometers around you, but up there you're going around the planet so quickly and you see it that way. You begin to think about the global issues that are important for humanity. Are we taking care of our planet? That atmosphere that we share, all of us, the oceans that we share. You do, as your eye gets trained, begin to see the effects of human presence on Earth. On my first flight, there were a fairly sizable portion of the rainforest was on fire. It had been lit on purpose to clear land for farmers. This was a decision made by the government of Brazil, perhaps well-intended. But the result, of course, was that you were losing a large piece of the rainforest, and there was 1 million square kilometers of smoke above it. And that is definitely because of humans. I saw effects of pollution, large palls of yellowish air above places like California, above the Mediterranean, above China, above some of our Great Lakes, all because of the things we put into the air, some of which you can see. You can't see the greenhouse gases, but you can see the other pollutants that make it up there. Those kinds of things. Desertification because of trees being cut down and the soil becoming eroded and washing away into rivers. Those are things that are because of humans. And so you become concerned that this place has, we have a responsibility to take care of this place. And you're also aware, although you can't see it, that we're always fighting with each other down here on the planet. At any one time, there are at least a dozen conflicts going on around the world, at least a dozen, and some of them pretty serious. And so your frame of reference goes from the local to the global, and it's the existential issues that affect planet Earth that begin to sort of affect your way of thinking. And I think that's stayed with me ever since.
You went on to take part in 2 other space missions in 1996 and 2000, and then you moved back to Canada in 2001, where you led the Canadian Space Agency until 2005. And then in 2006, you made the leap to a completely different arena, politics. Why?
I think I need a glass of water. The quick answer is that as president of the Canadian Space Agency, it was my job to recommend. I reported to a minister, the Minister of Industry, Science and Technology. I recommended to that minister the direction of this Canadian space program. The Canadian Space Agency is the equivalent of NASA on a smaller scale, and we have a space program, and it was my job to make recommendations to the minister. But it is the minister and cabinet and government who make the decisions. They can ignore my recommendations or they can follow through on them. But I can only recommend, and then whatever they decide, I have to execute. And I thought, even though I was 56 at the time, I thought that the opportunity to be on the other side of the table and to be involved in making some of those decisions was something that was worth making an attempt to enter politics. And that was the main reason why I decided to jump in, although my timing was very, very bad, because we had just finished with 12 years of Liberal government with Mr. Chrétien, Mr. Martin, and the normal fatigue that sets in after the same government has been there for so long plus in Quebec, the sponsorship scandal. You know, as sometimes in the vernacular, I say my timing sucked on my decision to enter into politics. But I wanted to do it, and I did it, and I fell flat on my face the first time because I ran in Vaudreuil-Soulanges and learned a huge amount in that first somewhat humiliating experience. I tell people that when I was an astronaut, everybody liked me. When I switched careers, it was a different matter. When you're a politician, people feel entitled, and rightfully so, to tell you what they think of your policies, sometimes to tell you what they think of you or your boss, and that's fair enough. I always hope that it remains polite, but it doesn't always, unfortunately.
You mentioned actually in the book that you felt you were not a charismatic person, but you were a dependable and hardworking and engaged person. And you wondered whether you would be accepted in politics because of that. Do you think it was a drawback, or was it in some ways an advantage?
So when that was in reference to the fact I ran for the leadership of the Liberal Party in 2013, and there were 9 of us who ran, including the winner, Justin Trudeau. And what I felt I offered was, first of all, a track record. 56 I was a little older than that by then, but I'd had a whole life's experience as a professional. Plus, I felt that I was proposing good policy. Obviously not enough. And I think the charisma factor plays a big part in people's decisions when it comes to an election. People are naturally attracted to somebody who radiates that kind of charisma, which I won't speak for now, but certainly back in 2015, Justin Trudeau radiated that kind of charisma at a time when people were ready for a change. Remember I said they kicked the Liberals out in 2006 because we'd been there 12 years. Well, after almost 10 years of Mr. Harper, the same phenomenon occurred again. Canadians were in the mood for a change. Let's elect somebody new. And Justin represented that breath of fresh air and that sort of charisma. So I think charisma does play a role in getting elected, but you also have to have policy, and Justin Trudeau had policy, no question about it. But I didn't have that. As I say in the book, I was a steak, but without the sizzle. So. So it is what it is, and I'm really glad I did run because it was a great experience.
Now, you debated Justin Trudeau during that 2013 campaign, and you asked him what made him think he was qualified for the job. Do you think that rankled with him afterwards?
A lot of people have asked me that question. You know, when you're doing a leadership race, there's 9 of you. You're all in the same party, and you all are hoping that whoever wins, everybody else will rally behind them and we'll all work together because we're from the same party. But it's a very delicate thing because you're also competing against each other. You want to be the leader and they want to be the leader. So there's a line that you mustn't cross because you certainly don't want to burn your bridges in a leadership race. You want to end up working and being friends together. And I agonized a little bit over whether I should ask him the question, what makes you feel that you are qualified to be the leader and potentially one day the prime minister? Did he hold that against me? Of course, I have no way of knowing for sure, but I tend to think that he put it behind him because when we did finally become the government in 2015, he asked me to be one of his ministers. So, you know, if he felt any resentment from that, it wasn't so large that he excluded me from cabinet.
Now, you then served as transport minister for 5 years, which is quite a long time to be in a portfolio. What were some of the highlights during that time? It was quite a time.
I loved it. Transport is something about which every single Canadian, including every one of you, has an opinion and a criticism of one kind, or perhaps several criticisms. Now, remember, some of it's municipal, some's provincial, and some's federal. I loved the job because it involved everybody. It wasn't sort of an abstract portfolio. Everybody uses transportation. It's not only important for people who take planes and trains and boats and cars and trucks, it's also very important for the Canadian economy because we are a trading nation and we move vast amounts of resources and goods across the country to our ports and on to other world destinations. Huge amounts across the border. As you know, recently reading an article, apparently we trade close to $3 billion a day with our US neighbor. So we are a trading nation, and how well transportation works in a country like Canada, the second largest country on earth, with a difficult environment for part of the year, is a challenge. And I am most proud of the fact that I think, although there was no dramatic event that I would sort of single out as saying that was me, I think that I was engaged with all aspects of it and tried to make it as efficient as possible. And so the fact that I was there 5 years and 2 months, the third longest in the history of Canada's transportation ministry, gave me a chance to really dig down and get very familiar with a very complex portfolio.
Now, despite that long time that you spent in transport as minister, you write that you only met with Justin Trudeau twice and that he seemed very aloof. It's surprising considering his persona, which was so friendly and approachable. What do you think that was? Was it just you, or was it his character?
Well, you know, first of all, I don't like to, in all my professional life, I don't like to bother the boss unless I really need to, unless I feel that there's something that I think he or she needs to know. So I've learned, and you know, as an engineer, as an astronaut, you have to be fairly independent in the way you work and the way you operate. And so that's one thing. So I was sort of a self-operating person. But once in a while, I did feel that I needed to consult the Prime Minister, and I didn't feel he was very approachable. Although he said his door was always open, I didn't get that feeling that I could just sort of drop in any old day. Now, some ministers could. He had some who had been friends of his for a long time, almost childhood friends. That's okay. That's okay. You know, as long as he trusts me, that's what matters. And so I was able to do it. On a couple of occasions, I did ask to see him because I really felt strongly about it. One had to do with rail and one had to do with air. And I did speak to him on those occasions. At the same time, this is perhaps not that unusual, although other ministers have also commented on it. But you know, I'm 23 years older than Justin Trudeau. I'm a different generation. I think differently. I have a different personality. So, but I'm making the observation that he was not, in my case, terribly approachable, and that's okay. It didn't stop me from doing my job.
Then in 2021, you were appointed as Foreign Affairs Minister, and you served in that position for 10 months. It was quite a trying time in foreign affairs. What were the highlights of that time?
Yes, it was a trying time. First of all, I was surprised when he transferred me from transport to foreign affairs, which I'd always wanted to do. So I was very, very happy to be in it. But it was a difficult year. For the 9 months that I was in foreign affairs, first of all, we had the two Michaels, they were now in their third year of incarceration in China. And one of my greatest pleasures is that we were able to bring them back in September of that year before I lost my position as the cabinet minister. Second thing, and the biggest thing, was Afghanistan, the debacle in Afghanistan, and I write quite a bit about that in the book. But you may recall there was an election in 2021. Well, you wouldn't have seen me out there in Westmount NDG campaigning, because I was spending 90% of my time involved with trying to get as many Canadians or Afghans who had worked for Canada out of Afghanistan at a time when the Taliban took over much quicker than anybody had ever anticipated. They marched into Kabul on the 15th of August, surprised themselves at how little resistance they had met, chiefly because the Afghan National Army just folded. They just folded, or in some cases they panicked and didn't offer any opposition whatsoever. And that was the very same day that the election was kicked off, and so in Canada here on the 15th of August. But I spent most of my time focusing on Afghanistan and trying to get as many people out as possible, working with other ministers. So that was a very difficult summer. I don't think personally that we should have had an election at that point, but it happened, and we just had to compose with that.
Then coming back from the 2021 election, Trudeau did not reappoint you to cabinet. How did that feel?
Well, I say in the book it was like a punch in the gut. It was difficult because had I known before the election that he was not planning to reappoint me, I may not have run, because to run and then 3 weeks later be told you're out of cabinet is not something that anybody would look forward to. And I thought that he would keep me there because he didn't tell me anything. And I really wanted to do a lot of things at Foreign Affairs. I'd been there by then 7 months, and there were so many things I wanted to do to make it a better ministry. And I was just getting going, and unfortunately he called me one night and said that he had made the decision that I would not be in cabinet any longer. And so it was a rude shock for me, and a tremendous disappointment. I had just been elected by you 3 weeks before, and he offered me to become the ambassador to France, and I just felt that would not be appropriate after my riding had reelected me with a strong vote for me to say, oh, sorry people of Westmount NDG, I'm going off to Paris. So I decided to stay on as a backbencher. And I have to say the last year and a half before I did resign and leave were very satisfying, because I had 2 files that I was given as a backbencher. One was to chair the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs, which meant a great deal to me because I believe very much in reconciliation. And secondly, I was the co-chair of the Special Joint Committee on Medical Assistance in Dying, which was a 7-month undertaking, probably the most demanding job that I had in my 14 and a half years in Parliament, because it's such an emotional issue, and it's one that people have, although most Canadians support it under most conditions, there are people who feel very strongly the other way too. So it has to be dealt with a great deal of sensitivity, but also in the interests of Canadians. So that was my last job, and when I did leave in 2023, beg your pardon, March of 2023, I left with a sense of enormous satisfaction that I had, despite the ups and downs, mostly ups, I hope, had a very, very satisfying career as a politician. I left with peace of mind.
You also took a very strong stand on the Official Languages Act, which was being revised at the time. Maybe you can tell us about that.
Yes, I often tell people that if you are an MP, like I was, and I'm a Liberal MP, but it doesn't matter which party you're in, you will generally agree with 90% of what your fellow MPs and your government wants to do, because you share those values very, very strongly. And there may be 5–10% where you don't feel quite as strongly, because we're all individuals and we don't all think. We're not all out of the same cookie cutter. We all have different views on different matters, where maybe you don't agree with everything, a piece of legislation or whatever that your government has decided to do, but you like parts of it and you'll go along with it and you'll support your government. But once in a while, there's a 2 or 3% where you feel very strongly that you don't agree with your government's position. And I called it at the time, it was quoted as my hill to die on. And what it was that Canada was modernizing the Official Languages Act, which was Bill C-13. And in it, there were references to Bill 96 from Quebec, which is the Charter of the French language, Quebec's French language. And I felt that references to it were enshrining its validity into a federal act, which I felt was inappropriate, because if it was challenged, as it has been, then the Quebec government could say, it's in the federal Bill C-13. You've legitimized it by putting it in there. And I felt that was inappropriate. So I said so. And of course, I got raked over the coals by the Quebec media, which is fine. I'm a big boy. But it was something that I felt extremely strongly about and still do today. Don't get me wrong. I support the protection of French in Canada very strongly. I always have. I was a supporter of Bill 101 decades ago. But Bill 96, in my opinion, in certain areas jeopardized the language rights of the Anglophone minority in Quebec, and that is why I took a stand.
Now, in politics, we look around the world, politics seems to be undergoing a seismic change. And we saw that with the re-election of Donald Trump. You write that you spent 8 years in Houston as an astronaut, and that your neighbors were staunch Republicans and evangelical Christians, even though they were very nice people. Did that experience give you any insights into the political culture in the United States, and what could lie ahead?
It did give me insight into the political culture that existed back then in the 90s. But that is not the United States of today. The United States of today, which has been enormously distorted and shaped by Donald Trump, is, as you can see, because he did get elected, is one of protectionism and is one of xenophobia, as exemplified in the policies with respect to people coming into the United States, which he has variously described in ways that you've all heard him describe them on television, and his most recent, threats to impose tariffs because we're, letting unfettered access from Canada into the United States of illegal aliens coming into his country, and that kind of protection and xenophobia did not come through to me back in the 90s when I was there, but I believe it was a different country. Today it has changed, and unfortunately not for the better.
This week, Trump announced that he's going to put in a 25% tariff on Canadian and Mexican imports. What do you think Canada should do in reaction to this?
I think we need to stand our ground, and I think we do have some leverage here in Canada. I hope we do not roll over, because that would be a pity. And I think that, first of all, a lot of Americans will tell you that some of his proposals with respect to tariffs are going to backfire in the United States. They'll have a negative effect with respect to the cost of goods there. They'll have a negative effect with respect to the viability of their manufacturing sector. The policies with respect to immigration are going to cause very serious problems with respect to the availability of a workforce in the United States, to perhaps some of the jobs that are less desirable, but that many people fill in that country. I looked up the statistics, and I got them out of the Globe and Mail. There were, in the fiscal year that just ended in the United States, with their fiscal year goes right up to the 1st of October, there were 21,000 plus people arrested by American Border Patrol trying to get into the country from Canada in the last fiscal year. About 21,000 people who came to Canada and then tried to illegally enter into the United States, 21,000. From the Mexican border side, trying to get into the United States, there was last year 1.53 million. The ratio is 65-1. So one should keep a sense of proportion. The other area that he goes on about is fentanyl. There were, in the case of fentanyl entering from Canada into the United States, there were last year 43 pounds. And in the case of the United States coming from Mexico, the number, I haven't got it on the tip of my fingers, but the ratio is 650-1. In other words, a totally different ballgame. So to treat Canada and Mexico in the same way with respect to how porous our border is totally uncalled for. Canada has leverage with respect to certain commodities. Like it or not, we supply the United States with a quarter of its oil. And that plays directly into the price of gas at the gas pump in the United States. And Americans hate it when the price of gas goes up. So that's an example of where we have leverage, because if it's going to be more expensive to get that, we will pass on those costs ultimately to the American taxpayer. That's what's going to happen. Same with steel and aluminum. I was on Team Canada back in 2017 when we were renegotiating NAFTA 2. And I was in Washington, D.C., and spoke to the annual reunion of the governors of the 50 states and told them that if they insisted on tariffs on steel and aluminum coming from Canada, which Trump at the time said was a threat to U.S. national security, the fact that we were selling it to them, that it could be a deal breaker for NAFTA too. And Trump dropped them because he realized that it was that kind of a threat to the United States. They need Canadian steel and aluminum. So as we all know, Trump is they call him a transactionalist. He's the art of the deal. So his recent threat with respect to 25% tariffs is just his opening gambit. It's his opening position. He knows he's not going to get that, but he just wants to knock us off our back foot as his starting position. I hope Canada displays spine in terms of reacting to it. We will have to make some adjustments, there's no question about it, but he's not going to get everything he wants if we play our cards properly.
Now, to come back to our own political situation here in Canada, things look very bleak for your Liberal Party. The Conservatives look to be poised for a big majority. How do you see the future of the Liberal Party?
Well, getting back to what I said about after 10 years of Harper and 12 years of, we've now reached 9 years of the Liberals, and Canadians are once again saying, well, maybe it's time for a change. That's certainly if reflected in the polls, there's no question about it. You cannot stay fresh and alluring for indefinitely as a party. Eventually you blot your copybook, you the shine wears off, and people say, oh, maybe it's time for a change. Let them go back and think about it. I know this. I was in 7 years in opposition as we were trying to, and became the third party. That's unprecedented. So I know what it's like when Canadians say it's time for a change. So it is one of those moments, and I personally think that Justin Trudeau is definitely going to run. He's made that very, very clear. And I think that if he does so, he must bear in mind that if things go badly, he will have to bear the responsibility almost exclusively, because he seems to have excluded the possibility of stepping down. So it will be on his shoulders. So it's a big weight on his shoulders, but Canadians seem to be in the mood for change. Not that they're necessarily attracted strongly to the alternative, but it's just that they've maybe had enough of the Liberals for a while. We'll see.
As you say in your book, it's been an extraordinary ride. What's next for Marc Garneau?
So learning how to make some really great food in my house. So I've become a nut for New York Times recipes, and I'm really enjoying my time in the kitchen. And Pam, my wife, is delighted with that, and which must mean that I do a few things decently. But I am really discovering. I remember my mother telling me when we were growing up, there were 4 boys in our house. She said, I don't mind cooking. In fact, I enjoy it because it's creative. The hardest part is deciding every single day, what are we going to make tonight? And that is tiring, and you have to go get it, and you have to decide. You don't want to have the same thing every night. And fortunately, I only do it, once or twice a week so far. And so I have not run into that problem. And every decision to make something is like a new adventure for me. And I'm really enjoying the creativity of being in the kitchen and being an engineer. I love the chemistry of it all and the physics of it all. Yeah, so that's my ambition in life, is now to make. I've climbed my mountains, and now I'm climbing little hills. So.
Do you do takeout?
Haven't risen to that level yet.
Okay. Well, thanks so much. It's been amazing. I wonder if anybody in the audience would be interested in asking questions.